Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my movie review series. So as I mentioned in my most recent movie review, which for those of you who don't know was that bland, forgettable garbage called 65, which I barely remember anything about, I'm pretty sporadic when it comes to reviewing movies nowadays, since the vast majority of movies now are complete and utter crap, and they serve as little more than political propaganda and mind-numbingly mediocre cash grabs. That's pretty much all you can expect from modern Hollywood nowadays. So reviewing movies isn't something that's going to be a regular occurrence on the channel, at least not for the time being. Having said that, I was recently at one of those unlimited screenings where you get to see a particular new movie before its release. Some movies get these kinds of special early access screenings, and the one we went to see was this movie, Big George Foreman, which is of course, who would have thought, based on the true story of the former two-time heavyweight champion of the world, grill entrepreneur, and preacher, Big George Foreman, who made history in 1994, the year I was born, becoming the oldest heavyweight champion of all time at the age of 45, which is incredible of course. Now when it comes to boxing movies, despite being a big boxing fan, boxing movies have never really been my cup of tea, with a few exceptions, namely Raging Bull, which is a great movie. Most boxing movies I find to be incredibly boring, and a lot of the time they tend to embellish things and be overly dramatic, and very rarely do they work in my personal opinion. Having said that, to be honest, this movie blew me away. As shocking as this sounds, Big George Foreman is fantastic. This is one of the best, if not the best boxing movie I've ever seen. So hear me out. One of the things I was concerned about going in is that in order to do George Foreman's life story justice, the movie was going to have to do its best to be as factually accurate as possible. It's no secret that George Foreman, in addition to being an accomplished boxer, is also a guy with a pretty rough past, being raised in poverty, and being particularly violent in his early years, by his own admission. And over time, he changed completely, particularly when he had a near-death experience after his fight against Jimmy Young, and a spiritual experience that led him to God, becoming a born-again Christian, and later a Christian preacher. And I couldn't help but think that with the way things are in the world right now, and the general state of the entertainment industry, I was worried that this part of Foreman's life, which is of course pretty important, by his own admission, would either be skipped over, or watered down. Thankfully that's not the case, and Foreman's Christian faith serves as his primary motivation in the movie. The movie actually dedicates a lot of time to this, showing Foreman dealing with some major setbacks in his career and in his life, and it attributes a lot of his experiences to God, essentially turning his back on fame and fortune for the sake of living for Jesus and preaching the gospel to everybody he can. And anybody who's had a spiritual experience and become a born-again Christian will know that the first thing you want to do is share that experience with others and preach the gospel, which translates to good news. And I really appreciate that. The movie really took its time to explain his Christian faith and what it meant to him, not only how it affected him, but his family and the people around him and his overall community. The movie starts by quickly going over Foreman's childhood. You see him growing up in a ghetto in Texas, where his family are basically scrounging for food and just trying to get by. He gets into trouble as a young man and later decides to turn his life around, educate himself, and try to get a job to support his family. However, when he realizes that wherever he goes, he just seems to get into fights, he ends up taking up boxing to give him a bit of discipline and somewhere to focus his pent-up anger. And I was surprised to learn that almost the entire career of Foreman is depicted in the movie, and not just his most significant fights. You see how he let his anger get the better of him at times, and he sort of fell in love with his power, neglecting skills and fundamentals. This of course lost him the fight against Muhammad Ali famously, and that fight, along with a few of the other major events in Foreman's career, is pretty clearly, accurately depicted in the movie. The acting of the movie is phenomenal. The guy they got to play Foreman, I forget the actor's name, but he did a great job for sure. He looks, acts and sounds just like the real George Foreman, and he really nails the mannerisms of Foreman throughout his life. The young Foreman who had that stone-faced, aggressive demeanour, and the old born-again Christian Foreman who was always smiling and making jokes. The actor did a great job. The supporting cast were good too. The guy they got to play Ali was pretty funny, and I'd say the whole cast did a great acting job throughout. Forrest Whitaker plays Foreman's coach, and he gets a lot of screen time in the movie. He's kind of the guy who mentors him all the way through it. And he's a very good character actor, you know, he's been in a lot of these types of movies. And yeah, he does a good enough job here. Interestingly, Cedric Boswell, you guys remember him, the guy that Povetkin fought in his first title defense. He was in this movie. He played Sonny Liston. He only appears in one scene, if I remember rightly. But yeah, that was an interesting acting choice there. So yeah, the acting in the movie, for the most part, was fantastic. And I didn't have a problem with any of it. Like, they all really looked and sounded the part. The movie's fight scenes were excellent too, and they looked just like the real-life Foreman fights. They really studied them well, and you can tell that they tried to make them look as authentic as possible. The movie was well-paced, without much pointless filler, and it was one of them movies that was moving and inspirational, but never felt forced or contrived. Every single thing that happened in the movie had a purpose, and was thematically relevant, which is very rare for movies based on true stories, but I digress. All in all, this was an excellent movie in my personal opinion, and I would certainly recommend it. There's one scene in particular that actually reduced me to tears, and that's very rare for movies. So yeah, this movie was a pleasant surprise, and I would be absolutely shocked if there's a better movie than this released in 2023. I hear that critics are hating the movie, they are absolutely livid about it. I think a lot of critics went to see this movie thinking it was going to be some BLM power fantasy, but clearly those critics hadn't done their research and didn't know much about the real story of Big George Foreman, did they? Because he's a born-again Christian, and he's not the type of person that would fall in line with them and their political agenda, is he? So yeah, I find that pretty funny that the critics are just bashing the movie, and it's to be expected. But yeah, I give Big George Foreman a solid 9 out of 10. A truly great movie, and I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see it again. I might actually go and see it again next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more content. I may do more movie reviews in the future, maybe some old movies, maybe some retro movie stuff. We'll see. Thanks for watching, and yeah, God bless.